Welcome everyone to our Literacy and Justice, a Family Advocacy workshop. We are so excited you joined us today. This workshop is in partnership with the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children, who will be facilitating today's workshop. My name is Natasha Quiroga. I'm the Director of Education Policy and Inside Schools at the New Schools Center for New York City Affairs, which is an applied policy research institute that drives innovation and social policy. And Inside Schools helps families learn about New York City public schools and provides information that they can use to support their child's education. So today's workshop is in partnership with the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children. And your presenters for today are Risha Conroy and Debbie Meyer. And this workshop aims to empower families with the knowledge and skills necessary to understand and advocate for your children's literacy success. And so today you'll gain a foundational understanding of reading assessment data and how it informs instruction and intervention. And you'll learn how to interpret and utilize the data to have informed conversations with your children's teachers and effectively support your children's learning journey. So while I introduce our speakers, if you can please fill out the poll, which we'll have to get started right here. And actually, I don't think I can start the poll. Oh, no, here it is. Let's launch our poll. If you can share with us your role, whether you're an educator, a parent, a guardian, a community advocate, as well as where you're tuning in from. And while you're doing that, I would like to introduce Risha Conroy, who is the founder and executive director of the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children, a nonprofit organization working to eliminate the amplified inequities for Black children experiencing unaddressed dyslexia and related learning disabilities. Ms. Conroy is a mother of 2 kids with learning disabilities, including a son with dyslexia, which motivated her. She's motivated by her family's journey to pursue her lifelong passion for educational equity. She is a speech language pathologist with a strong interest in language, literacy, and culture, and serves on the National Center on Improving Literacy Family Engagement Advisory Board, the New York City's Department of Education's Literacy Advisory Council, and Learning Allies National Advisory Board, Evidence Advocacy Center, and the New York State Dyslexia and Dysgraphia Task Force. And our other presenter today is Debbie Meyer. Debbie is a founding member of the Dyslexia Plus in Public Schools Task Force, which is a small group of community leaders working to help students with dyslexia and related language-based disabilities thrive in their neighborhood schools. And she now consults for the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children and New York City Public Schools, and will join Iona University as advocate in residence in the Department of Education. Debbie served on Mayor Adams' transition team and is an Ashes Legacy Foundation board member. And in 2022, she was appointed to the Chancellor's Literacy Advisory Committee. And in 2024, New York State Education Department appointed her to the Dyslexia Dysgraphia Task Force. So we have some great presenters. Just going to leave the poll open for a little bit so everybody can participate, but just some housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and we'll share it out with all participants, including all who RSVP'd. We'll post it on Inside Schools YouTube channel as well. And we'll go ahead and end the poll really quickly. So it looks like we have majority folks are parents, and see Brooklyn, Manhattan, Bronx, and Queens representation. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm going to unpin myself, go off camera, and I'll turn it over to Debbie and Risha to share more with you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Risha Conroy. I'm the founder and the executive director of the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children, and I'm so glad to be here this evening to support families as they advocate for their children, especially with all of the changes that are happening in New York City public schools. And with parent-teacher conferences coming up, there's a lot of information to share, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is our family advocacy workshop, Literacy and Justice. And you can go to the next slide. Just a quick disclaimer, although we are advocates and, oh, you're going too far ahead.
Yeah,
that's okay. There we go. Very quick disclaimer, although we may have licenses or have some professional experience, all the information this evening is for informational purposes only. And if there's something specific that you're seeking, we recommend that you reach out to a professional for advice before making any sort of final decisions. But certainly we do our best to make sure that all of the information that we share is accurate and reliable. So DABC was founded in 2020, and again, founded because of my experience with my son trying to navigate the educational system for a Black boy who has dyslexia, not in New York City, right outside New York City, but facing a lot of language around low expectations for him. And so as a learner in the classroom and as a child with dyslexia in the classroom, he was invisible. And so the organization was born to support families as they navigate that journey, that intersection of ableism and anti-Black racism. And so our mission is to eliminate the amplified inequities for Black children experiencing unaddressed dyslexia and related learning disabilities. And certainly there are other isms that also intersect as families are facing these challenges. And so there are many communities that are parallel, have very similar experiences. So we hope that everyone will gain from what we're working towards. So this evening, we are going to do a quick review of how we learn to read. So you may have seen a couple of the previous workshops that are available on InsideSchools, but we're going to do just a quick review because that's going to really guide us to understand what's happening with our universal screeners, also called benchmark assessments, and diagnostic reading assessments, and how you use that information in order to have those conversations with your child's teacher, which will lead to advocacy, right? So you better able to understand what is happening with your striving reader and to partner with your school. So we're going to cover all of that this evening. And this workshop is geared towards parents, although advocates and certainly educators will also be able to hopefully gain something from this as well. So we talk about literacy and justice, and we've gone deeper and deeper into the work, right? So equity is important, right? But we talk about justice because not only are we making sure that everyone has access, but we're also breaking down systemic barriers to access. And so literacy is transformational, right? And so we start at that point. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see one of our favorite quotes from Frederick Douglass, who was an abolitionist. And it says, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." And this has certainly been true since the early days of the founding of our country. But literacy has not been something that everyone has had access to. So we know, beginning with anti-literacy laws, where enslaved Africans were not allowed to read, where it was punishable by death and or beatings. And we see this history resurfacing in different ways as we have groups of individuals who don't have access to the written word in the same way. And so our work starts with this historical perspective and continues to the present day. And we can go to the next slide. Just back one. Oh, there we go. And so I talked about literacy as transformative, right? Certainly transformative, coming from the point of view of Frederick Douglass, like I said, who was an abolitionist and who used literacy as a way to not just free his body, but to free his mind and to question his existence and his role in the world. And that's what we want our children to do as well, right? We want them to be critical readers. We want them to have critical literacy. And the UN identifies literacy as a human right, and it acknowledges that lack of literacy negatively impacts life outcomes. And this is across the world, right? So we think about literacy as a human right. We know that it is the foundation for lifelong learning, and that not only is it transformative, but it's also protective in nature, right? So individuals who are literate tend to have better life outcomes. Individuals who are not literate or who have low literacy tend to have lower life outcomes. And so we understand as well that it is imperative that our children have access to the written word. And so we talked about this sort of historical aspect around anti-literacy laws. And what we know today, and this data is from 2019, but the truth of it is that this has been, for the most part, consistent across the last 3 decades, right? So we know we have a national literacy crisis, and New York City is certainly taking some big steps to begin to address that. So we know that across the country, 34% or only 34% of fourth grade public school students were reading at or above NAEP proficiency level. And NAEP is our nation's report card. And then when we look at these numbers by race and ethnicity, we start to see the disproportionate impact, right? And so beginning with 55% for Asian and Pacific Islanders. So, still a lot not reading at grade level. It goes to 44% for white fourth graders. And then we have this big drop, right? So 23% for Latino Hispanic fourth graders, 20% for American Indian or Alaska Natives, and then 18% for Black or African American fourth graders. And so it is about literacy, it is about justice, and it is about addressing the isms at that intersection. So how do we tackle this? We tackle it by ensuring that every child has access to evidence-based literacy instruction, which very often you'll hear referred to as the science of reading, which is an interdisciplinary body of knowledge around how we learn to read. So we're going to start off with a really quick poll. You can put it in the chat or not. We didn't enable the poll here, but fact or fiction? Our brains are wired to learn to read. Okay. So this is fiction, right? Our brains are not wired to learn to read. Our brains are wired for language. So when we think of as oral language, they're parts of our brains that work specifically to understand and to process the sounds that we hear and to produce spoken language. But there's no part of our brain that is specific to reading. And in fact, what we have to do is rewire the brain, and we can rewire the brain by having evidence-based literacy instruction in the classroom. So when we think about the brain, we want to change this language brain. We want to repurpose it so that it can now become a reading brain as well. And so when we think about reading, we have to remember that reading is actually very new in terms of the amount of time that human beings have been on the earth, right? And with the Industrial Revolution, when the printing press, more people had access to the written word, but our brains were not initially wired for this. So what we're essentially doing is creating new neural pathways, right? And so here you can see the brain of a reader who is struggling, and you can see the areas of the brain that are activated, and this area right here is overactivated. It's working very hard, but it's not working efficiently because this reader does not have those neurological pathways. Here is a reader who is a quote unquote strong reader, and here you can see that that more areas of the brain are activated, right? And so this reader has built those neurological pathways, and the brain has been repurposed so that it's working efficiently in order to connect sound to letters. And so we do this by having explicit and systematic instruction, which is the curriculum that you're going to see in more than half of our school buildings now, and many of them are moving towards having that over the next year. And so by having this type of instruction, we actually rewire the brain. And specifically for our students who have dyslexia, it's required for them to learn to read, right? They're not going to access the written word without having this explicit and systematic instruction. Not only do they need it, but they also need more repetitions of it, right? So the more you do something, the more you're able to build those neurological pathways, and our dyslexic students need more time practicing in order to do that. And so, some people will say for a child who doesn't have dyslexia, maybe they need 5 to 7 repetitions of something. But many of us need more. And for our students who have dyslexia, they may need 30 to 100 repetitions of the same thing in order to create those connections. So we're going to dig in a little bit more into what is reading. And in front of you, you have a very, very simple view of reading that we're going to use and refer back to as we talk about the universal screeners that are being used in the building. So when we think about reading, and this is a multiplication equation, there's decoding. So decoding is our ability to sound out words, times language comprehension. So language comprehension is our vocabulary and it's our background knowledge. And it's our sentence structure. So, you know, simple sentences or to really complex sentences. It's also our ability to make inferences. And so you may hear, if you have children who are in older grades, this idea around figurative language. So they're talking about metaphors and similes. And we use all of this to understand oral language, right? To build that. Decoding times language comprehension is what gives us reading comprehension. So because this is a multiplication and not an addition equation, if our decoding is at 0, right? So we have no decoding abilities times really good language comprehension, let's say at 1, 0 times 1 equals 0. So what this tells us is that we have to be building in both of these areas in order for reading comprehension to increase. And so when we're thinking about a child and we're thinking about where they're struggling, we're going to want to understand, are they having difficulty with decoding, so sounding out the words? Are they having difficulty with language comprehension, so understanding oral language, in order to figure out how we address reading comprehension? And reading comprehension is the goal of what we're doing, right? I talked about being critical readers, critical literacy. And so we're going to use this equation and refer back to it as we think about what your child, what skills your child might need additional support with. Before we move on to the next slide, the other thing I want to add is when we're thinking about, and this workshop is not specifically about dyslexia, but when we're thinking about a child who has dyslexia, they will have difficulties with decoding, right? So with the sound to symbol connection, that's where we start to really see the breaks. And it'll show up both in sounding out words, and it'll also show up in spelling, right? It'll show up in what we call the code of the language. So when we think about instruction, and I'm not sure what grades our parents have students in, but in kindergarten to 2nd grade, we think about phonics instruction, right? This is something that should be in every general education classroom. So in K-2, we're building that decoding side of the equation. So phonics instruction, decodable fluency, we want our students and our children to become more automatic with their decoding, so they're not sounding out every word. The more that they're exposed to it and the more that they're practicing those skills, it becomes automatic. It becomes part of that neurological framework that they build those new pathways. In K-2, though, we're also focusing on the second side of the equation. So language comprehension. So hopefully there are really good discussions around what children are seeing or what is being read to them. They're building vocabulary, so learning new words. And knowledge building, right? So across the curriculum, everything from what might be happening in social studies to science, they're building knowledge, and all of these things are happening in the general education classroom. When we get to grade 3 and up, things shift a little bit, right? So you've heard we're shifting from learning to read to we're reading to learn, right? And so in grades 3, there still will be some phonics happening, but not the same sort of phonics that we're seeing in K-2. So now we'll be looking at like morphology, so the parts of the word and building from there. And we'll continue to build fluency with things that we have mastered, right? So when we think about a fluent reader, we're thinking about a reader who has good accuracy, who has good rate, and who has good intonation or prosody around their reading. So students are working on this. They're also continuing to build that second part of the rope around language. So language comprehension, so still building vocabulary and knowledge. And now because they're reading, we're going to see the decoding, which was happening in grades K-2, and the language comprehension, which is continuing to happen, equal reading comprehension. And like I said, they're still building vocabulary, they're still building their knowledge. One thing, and the reason why we have this here, is that phonics instruction in its traditional sense does not happen after grade 3. So when we start talking about a child who's in grade 3 and up, who's still having difficulty with simple sort of decoding, we're going to have to think really carefully about the tiers of instruction, right? Because tier 2 instruction is typically a double dose of what's happening in tier 1. which means that our third grader is going to be getting more than what would be happening in the general education classroom because they've already passed this sort of basic phonics instruction. So it's something to keep in mind. So tier 1, and this is what I described here, is high quality core instruction, right? And there might be some small groups. So teachers, general education teachers might do some small group work. And they're going to have universal screeners that are aligned with the skills that they're being taught. So that decoding that we talked about, and we'll go into more detail around what some of the skills are that contribute to decoding. And then tier 2 instruction. So if your child is having difficulty and and tier 2 instruction is recommended, they're going to go into smaller groups, typically 6 to 1, with intensified instruction that really focuses on those reading skills that they're still working on, that might be missing, that they should have already mastered. And this will happen anywhere between 3 to 5 times a week. As part of the tier 2 process, there's still going to be the screening that should be happening for every child, but they're also going to more closely monitor their progress and see whether or not they're building those foundational reading skills. As part of this, they're also going to do a diagnostic assessment, which is really going to do a deeper dive into, okay, so they're not just having difficulty with decoding, but what are they having difficulty decoding? So are they still having difficulty with, short vowel sounds, with CVC words, or are they at the point where it's multisyllabic words that they're having difficulty with? And then it moves to tier 3 instruction, right? So if they're not responding at tier 2 with this sort of extra dose of instruction for K-2 and more individualized for grade 3 around phonics, then they would move to tier 3, where we're going to do more diagnostic assessment and we're going to individualize the instruction more. So now what will be happening is instruction that you wouldn't typically find in tier 1 or tier 2. That really gets into targeting those foundational skills. And again, screening and progress monitoring and diagnostic assessment will continue to happen as part of this progress or process.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Debbie. Risha, thank you for all that. That was really, really helpful. I'm going to be talking about our universal screening assessments. And I really kind of think of them in parallel to things like medication management and even your iPhone battery management. If we didn't actually monitor our iPhone battery, we would often play too long on social media and not have our GPS when we got off the subway and we could never get to our destination. We really want our doctors to be progress monitoring and making sure we're taking the right dose of a medicine and that we're improving or staying stable. So we're doing the same thing with education now. So universal screenings in our schools are administered 3 times a year. BOY stands for beginning of year, MOY, middle of year, and EOY is end of year. They're really quick measurements, and they're connected to that core instruction. And so that way they align to the grade that your child is in and also the time of year. They don't do the same test 3 times a year. They're trying to go along with nationally normed curriculum, and so they can test what children are actually supposed to be learning. They really help teachers identify the strengths and the challenges. And they are not just diagnostic, they're prescriptive. They guide the instruction for more intensive intervention. So what's New York City Reads? It's this program that's ensuring that every teacher and every student has access to really good quality evidence-based curricula, including assessments. The curricula was selected between a collaboration between the superintendent and their principals. And it was selected based on a lot of things that were already going on in New York City. There were a lot of schools using these 3. They weren't using it to the best. It was purchased at a district level, and New York City's offices at Tweed were able to use their purchasing power and their influence to work with these programs to make sure they're going to really work well for New York City kids. They are accompanying this with deep training and intensive training and support. People in the districts have gotten real extra support so they can then support the teachers in the schools in those districts. You'll see a list here of which districts were phase 1 and which are phase 2. Phase 2 got a head start. They've been had availability of training starting this spring. To support this, our universal assessments actually began in 2021. So we have 3 years of data on universal assessments. The foundational skills programs, Really Great Reading and Foundations, began universally in 2022. And we're rolling out these ELA curricula, which are knowledge building curricula and skills building in fluency and writing and reading. And the training and support are continuing. So what are the screeners in New York City? In K-2, every school has a cadence. And a cadence measures a lot of the phonics skills, phonemic awareness. Can kids hear all the sounds in the word? Phonological awareness, do they understand how the words are built? The real phonics skills that are brought to words, fluency, and comprehension. And again, it's per time of year. They're not measuring oral reading fluency before you've mastered all your phonics. In grades 3 to 12, there's 2 different programs. iReady is a computer-based. Oh, I forgot to say, the Cadence is administered by a teacher with an iPad, really noting what the kids are doing. iReady is on a computer. The kids are doing it themselves. It is adaptive and diagnostic. A school could go back to phonological awareness and phonics if they thought a kid needed that. So they could actually back diagnose a kid with iReady. It also measures fluency, vocabulary comprehension, and writing. Map growth is also adaptive. It does not go back to phonological awareness or phonics, but it does measure fluency, vocabulary comprehension, and it looks a little more at literary analysis and critical thinking and writing skills. So almost all the programs use these kind of benchmarks, and they use these colors. It's amazing how aligned all the colors are. The red is well below benchmark and the yellow is below benchmark, but green and blue mean you're doing pretty well. And it's, likelihood that you're going to progress. So right now, Risha and I are going to try something new. We're going to try a little role play. So Risha, welcome. I'm really happy to discuss your daughter's achievement this year.
Thank you. So I'm the parent, in case you don't know that, but thank you.
So, I know at the end of kindergarten and the beginning of this year, you were really worried about your daughter's achievement. We were too. And in fact, we built this class to put her in a 6-to-1 tier 2 instruction with other kids having the same struggles. And so, you saw this earlier in the year. Do you have any questions about the beginning of year and middle of year screening data?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to understand. So I see a lot of, things that look like pills on here with lots of colors. And when I'm looking at this, how do I know if she's reading at grade level?
The grade levels are green, but what we want to do is look for progress as well. So the first column on the left is the composite score. And you see that to the middle of the year, she actually did a little bit better. The NWF on the bottom of the second line is, what is it? It's nonsense word fluency. And she was actually doing better. She got to green in the correct letter sounds and to green in whole words read. Her fluency improved over where it was at the beginning of the year, but we're still working on that in the middle of the year. But I have to commend you because I'm about to show you the end of year, and it's clear you were working with her with our family packs at home. And I think you were really working on those decodable books as well, because look at this.
Wow. So I see where she started, with lots of reds and yellows across like all of these different areas. And now I'm seeing mostly blues and a green. So what is this telling me? Is she now reading on grade level?
She is reading on grade level. She needed a lot of extra practice. She was getting that practice in our tier 2. And tell me, were you practicing at home with her?
I was. I did my best to try to block out some time to do some of the decodable books.
That's great. I think that really helped. We'd like to keep her in tier 2 for 2nd grade because we do think she needs extra practice. And we really want her to get all these codes down. So when she's in 3rd grade, she is a really strong reader. Does that make sense to you?
I think it does. So you don't think that we need to do any more diagnostic testing or assessments?
The diagnostics that we did really showed her problems in phonics and phonemic awareness. It took her a lot longer to learn just that easy 3-letter blends. And once she got that, the other rules came a lot quicker, but she did have to practice more than other kids.
Okay. And so what should I be doing with her at home now since she's making so much
Well,
progress?
well, we're getting ready for summer. It'd be great if you could, we have the black and white decodables so she can practice everything she learned, but read alouds are really important this summer. You know, she can read those decodables aloud, but if you could read more books with her when you have time, if there's a library story hour she could go to, I think building her knowledge will really do a lot of good for her when she comes back to school next year.
Okay. And can you send some decodables or some websites home that I can use to practice and to listen to audiobooks?
Absolutely. Audiobooks are really good too. New York City has a subscription to Sora, and you can download and listen to audiobooks all summer. And I think I'll make sure you get the account information if you don't already have it. And it's connected to our public library, so there's lots of places you can check out audiobooks from.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I hope that was helpful to everybody. That was our first time trying that.
And this was an easy one because she made progress. So
yes, yeah, we're gonna have to find some other ones. We're gonna just show you a little literacy decision tree that should help parents ask the right questions as well. So this red box is really the box for parents. So if your kid is independently reading and comprehending, they're in the green or the blue, that's great. They should continue their grade level work and build knowledge. And I apologize for looking at my other screen, but I accidentally put this presentation on the other screen. But if there's a red flag there, the first thing you're gonna want to check out is fluency. If fluency is okay, then keep working on vocabulary and comprehension in your fluency. But you also want to continue grade level work. That might mean you need some assistive technology, maybe some audiobooks. But remember, there's universal design for learning, which means a kid should be able to show what they know in many different ways in your classroom. They should be able to learn in many different ways in the classroom. But if there's more red flags at fluency, you want to go backwards. Maybe it's word recognition. If word recognition is okay, you're going to continue to work on vocabulary, spelling, fluency, and comprehension. And also continue your grade level work, and still you might need some support to do that. If there's red flags at word recognition, you're going to go back to phonics. You're going to, if phonics are okay, the green or the blue, you're going to want to work on those irregular words that don't follow the phonics process, vocabulary, spelling, fluency, and comprehension. And you also want to continue grade level work. You should never be held back from your grade level work. If there are red flags at phonics, we've really got to check that phonemic awareness, that sound and symbols and how you break words down. If that seems all right, you've got a green or a blue flag, you just continue working on the phonics and the regular words and everything. And I can't say enough, continue that grade level work. If there's red flags at phonemic awareness, that's, depending what grade you're in. If you're in 1st grade, it's okay. You get that double dose and you really work on that phonemic awareness and phonics, I think you'll be okay. If you're in 4th grade and your phonemic awareness, you're really going to want to talk about good intervention and your special education options. So, this chart works really well, but it has to be grade dependent to use it really properly and know where you are and what skills you should have by where you are. So we've talked a lot about these diagnostic assessments. So in Tier 2 and Tier 3, we have a lot of teacher administered assessments. And we have curriculum-based progress monitoring. That means, did your child learn what I taught? And they do this at the end of the unit. They see if they monitor if the child actually got everything that they taught. Did they do it with a double dose and get everything? But that's progress monitoring. There's a whole suite of assessments that come with the foundations and really great reading programs. And there's a bunch of other assessments. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they really dig down to your child's particular strengths and weaknesses. And they can signal a risk for dyslexia. We can also ask our school psychologist for a comprehensive evaluation. There's a whole team that can do it. And they have licenses to these tests, and they've got training on the first 4. Phonological processing, individual achievement, the Pfeiffer assessment of reading, and the NEPSI, a neuropsych assessment. And they're learning how to use the brand new test for dyslexia. But school psychologists are working under a school psychologist license. So they can't actually diagnose something in the DSM or anything else. So it's staying at the IEP level, not a neuropsych evaluation level. The IEP level is a powerful tool for parents, though. It will get you through your high school. You have to repeat it every 3 years. It can get you college accommodations. It can and help with NICED. If you have a child with a disability, NICED will support them in college with tuition and housing allowances. So the IEP is good for that. You don't need a full neuropsych. A full neuropsych could be helpful, of course, and having that diagnosis could be helpful. And DABC does other sessions on that, but I think we're doing what we can do in our schools right now. So Risha, can you take us back to advocating?
I can, and if you want to just go ahead to the next slide. So if your child is not reading at grade level, what does that mean? So I'm going to pause just a little bit here to talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 again. Usually we, because we're focusing on universal assessments, we don't have our typical pyramid. But Tier 1 instruction is what happens in the general education classroom, right? So when we talk about the K-2, they have foundations. They have really great reading for phonics instruction. They have their ELA curricula, so that might be Wit and Wisdom or EL or HMH. And that's happening in the classroom with all students. If a child is identified on a universal screener as not meeting benchmarks, then the school is going to consider giving them more intervention, right? And so that would take them to Tier 2. And Tier 2 is when they would probably be pulled out of the classroom in a small group of, say, 6 students with one specially trained teacher. The specially trained teacher would be trained on structured literacy. So the intervention that a child who is struggling with reading, specifically around decoding needs, right? And they would go through that process of really drilling down into, well, what do they need extra help with? And they would get that, and they would progress monitor through a couple of cycles and determine whether or not that's enough. So for many children, that's going to be enough, right? And they're going to get a few cycles of an extra dose of what's happening in the general education classroom, and that will be it. For some students, though, they need even more. So they'll go from that Tier 1, which was happening in the general education classroom, to Tier 2, where they got that 6-to-1, that more individualized attention, to Tier 3. And Tier 3 is when we want to do a deeper dive into what might be happening. So first of all, it should be a smaller group. So now we're talking about 3 or 4 with one teacher or interventionist or specialist who has even more training who can then say, you know what, we're not going to do what was happening in the general education classroom with an extra dosage. We're going to look at some other approach or some other curriculums that might support them, or some additional approaches or interventions. And it's going to be more tailored to meet their need. And this is called the MTSS, or the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, also called RTI. And it allows you to teach the child, so to see what the child can do, to teach them, and then to retest them, and to kind of go through that cycle. For many parents, this will be the route that they take, because this is where you're going to find the specialist. But you can also go straight to a full comprehensive special education evaluation as well. So I wanted to go through that first, and then I'll come back to the second question that's in the chat. So if your child is not reading at grade level, there can be lots of reasons why, right? So we know that for many years, the curriculum that we had in our general education classroom was not teaching our children to read. And so there has been, new programs brought into the building in order to give students access to evidence-based reading instruction. In addition to that, teachers are being trained, right? Because you can't just put a curriculum into the building and say, go, right? Teachers need to understand how students learn to read, and they need to be able to respond to it. They need to understand the data that they're seeing around building those foundational skills, and then when to refer them to tier 2 and to tier 3. So this training is also happening. But if a teacher is not trained, the child is not going to have access to what they need. And then this data-driven instruction intervention, which I like to call equity-driven decision-making, because we want to make sure that we are making the right decisions for every child that's sitting in the classroom, and we're not waiting for them to fail. But the data-driven instruction is really being driven by those universal screeners that we talked about, and diagnostic assessment, which we're going to touch on again. The other reason that a child might be having difficulty is because they have dyslexia or another learning disability. So even with the right curriculum in the general education classroom and teacher training, a student might still need more. They might need more of higher dosage, so more time, or they might need a smaller group. So maybe a group of 6 is not working for them. They need a group of 3 with more individualized instruction. Because they need to build those neurological pathways. They need more time building those pathways, or another learning disability. So that's why I talked about RTI and special education, because sometimes you just need to get the big picture of what's going on with the child. Dyslexia often co-occurs, so it travels in pairs and in triplets. And so a child might have dyslexia and have ADHD, or have dyslexia and dysgraphia, which is a written language disorder. And so they will need to address like those other things as well in order to make sure that the child's needs are met. The other big one that also comes up is speech and language impairment, right? So we know that, 40 to 60% of our students who have dyslexia also have difficulties with language. So if we go back to that equation, we need decoding skills and language comprehension to get to reading comprehension. So if you see your child is still struggling, you may want to have a comprehensive evaluation in order to make sure that you're not missing any other pieces. So if your child is not reading at grade level, you want to understand what's happening in those universal screeners. So what has your child mastered? Do they have decoding and language comprehension skills that would lead to reading comprehension? So with decoding, what is phonemic awareness like? Does my child hear the sounds in words? Phonics and spelling, are they able to connect those sounds to the letters or to the letter combinations when they're reading, right? Or writing. Fluency, so now that they've, maybe they know the sounds, when they're reading, is it fluent? So what's the rate like? Are they reading really slow? Is it really labored? Is it really flat, so it has no intonation, so everything just kind of sounds really flat and the same? And then accuracy, right? So someone might read quickly, but are they reading the right words, right? Even the small words, right? So it and to and the, all of those words matter when we think about building reading skills. And then also you want to know, well, what's their language like? So do they have good vocabulary? Are they grasping the knowledge or the content that's being taught in the classroom? And again, all of these things will lead to reading comprehension. So when you're having those conversations with the teacher and you're looking at the universal screeners, you can ask, if you see, a red, you might want to dig a little bit deeper there and say, okay, I see that they're having difficulties with nonsense word reading. What does this mean, right? That might mean that they're still having difficulty with phonics and spelling. So those are the types of conversations that you want to have with your teacher in order to understand what intervention is being provided and why it's being provided. And a teacher should really be able to guide you through this. So you don't have to go into it knowing everything, but understanding like these are the foundational skills that they should have. So the top 3 questions to ask your child's school. So is my child reading at grade level? Which is a really interesting one because we've had some studies recently that tell us that as parents, we don't know if our children are reading at grade level. We think they are, but in fact, when we look at the test scores, they're not reading at grade level. And there was a national study done. There was a New York City study that was done. What's happening in the classroom is not what we're thinking at home. So ask the teacher specifically if they are and ask them to show you. And they can show you that with the universal screeners. If your child is not reading on grade level and you're seeing some of those reds and those yellows on the universal screeners when they come home, then you want to ask about a diagnostic assessment, right? So really tell me, my child is struggling. Now tell me exactly why they're struggling. What are they struggling with? And when we're done here, I'll ask Debbie to go back to that slide so we can talk a little bit more about what's in those diagnostic assessments. And what is the intervention plan? Okay, so my child is struggling. You did a diagnostic assessment. So what are we going to do? And here the teacher might say, you know what, we're going to do tier 2. They're going to get an extra dose of what was happening in the classroom because they're in 2nd grade and we're still working on phonics, right? 3rd grade, they might say, because 4th grade, let's do 4th grade, they're no longer working on phonics, but your child is struggling with phonics. They're going to tell you, okay, you know what, we're going to pull in this curriculum so that we can give them something that they missed in K-2. So, and then ask them, what can I do at home to support the child? Now, this doesn't mean that if you are really busy and you don't have time to sit for 30 minutes at home, that it can't, it shouldn't happen, right? It's not dependent necessarily on us, but we can certainly help and give a child more practice at home if we're able to do that. Okay, so the key takeaways this evening is that most students need to be taught using explicit systematic instruction. So this is the curriculum that we're seeing in our school buildings now, right? That are now based on the science of reading, that are based on this body of knowledge around how we learn to read. When we talk about reading comprehension, it requires both decoding, so strong phonics skills, and language skills, right? So one can't be absent, right? If one is absent, they're not going to have strong reading comprehension skills. If your child is not proficient in reading, meet with their teacher to review their universal screening data and discuss a plan to improve their reading achievement. If your child is getting tier 2 or tier 3 instruction and progress monitoring is happening, which it will happen, you can ask to see that, right? At minimum, you want to see that every time you get a report card, but you can certainly ask to check in more frequently. All right, so we can move to questions and answers. I think they can be put into the chat or into the Q&A. And there was a question regarding diagnostic assessments. So can you restate the first step a parent should take if they suspect a problem? So you might suspect a problem before you even see the universal screener, right? Especially if your child, like my son, he had preschool services. So I knew that he was already struggling with his language comprehension, which was part of that equation. And so you can certainly state your concerns before seeing the universal screener, and it's a conversation with the teacher. But once you see the universal screener, which you're going to get at the beginning of the year, that's going to be your first one, it's going to give you more information around where your child might be struggling. So if you start to see those red and yellow marks on the universal screeners, look a little bit more closely and see, okay, are they having are they struggling with letter naming fluency, which is predictive of reading difficulties? Are they struggling with reading whole words, which tells me that their phonics is not intact, and possibly there might be some reading challenges or reading disorder. It's not diagnostic, but it's telling me something is going on. So look a little bit deeper and use this to ask questions with the to the teacher. If they're having these red and yellow marks, they should then be getting a diagnostic assessment. So when I look at this, if I have a child who is struggling with whole word reading, right, and it tells me that they're in the red, and then I say, okay, you know what, they need intervention. Now I need to know what they need intervention on. So do they know their short vowel sounds, their long vowel sounds? Can they decode CVC words? Are they having trouble with blends? So, two consonants put together, where are they struggling? And then you can target it more specifically for what's happening. They may be past all of that, and maybe you just need to work on reading fluency, right? So that's what the diagnostic assessments will tell you. And that should happen for every child who has these red and yellow marks on the universal screeners. Okay, I think we have a couple more questions coming into the chat, Debbie. All right, what is a common roadblock that slows things down in getting a child the help they need? Do you want to take that one, Debbie, or want me to start?
I think traditionally the roadblock has been that teachers didn't have the proper preparation to really help, and they didn't have the materials that were appropriate for a kid that was struggling. They had these programs that really needed parents to do a lot of extra support at home, but the kids were not learning in the classroom. So if it is still happening and you're in a phase 1 district, you really have to dig into the data, what Risha just said, and ask for the diagnostics assessments, and ask for a comprehensive assessment from the school psychologist and the speech language pathologist to really understand your kid's strengths and weaknesses. And then ask what the school has available. Is there a 6-to-1 group? Is there a 3-to-1 group? Is your school, is it a SETS class? Is it an ICT? So you really have to understand what's available in that school and in that class. Do you have anything to add, Risha?
No, I think you covered it. So like not having the proper curriculum in the classroom, not having trained teachers, and as New York City Public Schools makes these changes, it's the largest school system in the country, and so the wish is that it's in every classroom right now, but it's not. So as a parent, you know if your school is in phase 1 or phase 2, because although the system is changing, you need what you need for your child now, right, today. So advocate to get that today. We're not going to wait for the system to change to fight for our child. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then around expectations. So remember, we've had classrooms and classrooms of children who are not reading on grade level. And so even our idea of what normal reading acquisition should look like is a little skewed, because we have seen these seas of struggling readers. And so everyone needs to reset and set high expectations for every child, because we know that with the right intervention, most of our students can be taught at least to decode, right? That part there. And then we have to, pull in other things if we're struggling with language and have other sort of maintaining factors.
Yeah. I think we also have to have high expectations for our teachers. They are learning for the first time a lot of this as well. And so we have to have these two truths in our hand, that this is incredibly urgent work, but it's also really hard work for our teachers. It's not instant, it's hard. Learning all these new programs, learning all these new assessments, learning all these new terms. But your kid is your kid, and you have to move forward with your kid.
Right. And if it's not happening in the school building, then where can my child get it? Because they can't wait until they're in phase 2 or whatever it's happening. So the other question in here is, what do you do if the screener has not changed from September to May, meaning that it is still consistently red and yellow? And so my question would be, has there been any intervention, right? And what has that intervention been? And it means that whatever is happening, so if there's the absence of anything, then something needs to happen. If some things have been happening already, then it's not working, right? We need to dig a little bit deeper into what the root causes are. And so it's time for action, essentially, like have a conversation with the school and let them know, I'm not seeing progress. What's the intervention? Why isn't it working? And if you feel like you need more, go ahead and request a comprehensive evaluation. You do not have to wait to get that. And sometimes that will help you discover some other things that also need to be addressed. Debbie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but there's one last question in there that I want to make sure that we get to as well.
Yeah, I think this question about the child with ASD who's reading at 4th grade level in 9th grade. Yes, the intervention can still work. I think it has to be really carefully crafted intervention by the time you're in 9th grade, whether you have ASD or not. And whether it is a good mix of speech pathology and phonics. I think the intervention has to be incredibly targeted at that age. And there's some schools that do this, and it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Just to add to what Debbie was saying, I think it's, a comprehensive evaluation. So knowing that there's another classification or diagnosis in there helps you to better tailor the intervention. But then there's some other questions that come up around like what other factors might be contributing to it. So if a child, for example, has some cognitive deficits, then it does take longer for them to learn to read. Doesn't mean that we give up, but it might take a couple more years than even for a child who is just sort of struggling in general. But it needs to become more individualized, and the interventionists, need to be able to address all of those other maintaining factors.
I think the child also has to be bought in. I think that's once you get to high school, making sure the kids are bought in and they understand it's probably not their fault. It was a systemic failure and not their fault that they weren't taught. Should go a long way.
But I like to think it's never too late. So we talked about the brain building new neural pathways, and we continue to do that throughout our life. And even sometimes when we have a traumatic injury later in life, we still can sometimes recover some of that loss as well. And also continue to explore like other ways for your child to access the curriculum. So even if they're not reading, look at assistive technology, because they can still build knowledge, they can still build language comprehension, which is going to give them access to the content that they need, which will, at the end of the day, make reading as a whole easier to access.
Right. Thank you so much, Debbie and Misha, for this very informative, information-full packed webinar and workshop. This was incredibly helpful. For everyone else, if you have any additional questions, because we are at time, feel free to email us at questions@insideschools.org. You can follow up with Debbie and Risha. But thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, again, will receive a link to the recording. It will also be placed on our YouTube channel, on YouTube, our Inside Schools YouTube channel. If you've got more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And if you need any additional resources, like the tool that Lydie posted in the chat, will also include any helpful resources in a follow-up email to everyone. And you can also check out our website, InsideSchools.org. So once again, thank you, Debbie and Risha. If you have any concluding remarks, feel free to add them here.
Oh, I should put up the slide to get on our mailing list.
Yes,
let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, you can absolutely reach out to us, and we have a lot of, this was an hour, so it was, a lot of information to pack in there. But we do have more workshops that we host monthly, and it's open to everyone to attend to really do a deeper dive into some of the questions that you might have, including more individualized questions. So here is a link to resources around literacy. QR code there. And then you can also follow us on social media at Dyslexia Black, where you'll be able to see the upcoming workshops, and you can join our mailing list here as well.
Okay. And we can also include these links in a follow-up email to all of participants as well.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Debbie and Risha, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. I know it was a long day. It's a beautiful day
Yeah.
to be outside. So thank you for sharing your evening with us. I think we do have somebody has a raised hand. I know, Keisha, if you had one last question for the Q&A, but we are short on time. So perhaps if you want to just send us an email with your question, we can make sure that question gets to Debbie and Risha. So thank you once again, everyone. Have a good evening.